Chapter 1. Salty Air and Closed Windows. Nora drove along the coast, and the asphalt beneath the wheels of her car disappeared, like her former life, noisy, full of office meetings, fake smiles, and endless alarm clocks. On the right side, the sea stretched out gray steel, with no reflection of the sun. The sea seemed to breathe, deeply, heavily, unhurriedly, as if it knew that something was about to happen. A village appeared ahead. Small, almost invisible, it seemed to grow out of the ground. There were no signs except for a wooden shield with a faded inscription, on which only the first word could be made out. Kala. The rest had been erased by rain and time. Nora gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. There were no networks here, no points on the map. Only a faint memory. Once, as a child, her father had brought her here for a few days. She didn't remember the name of the woman they had stayed with. Only the bells. And the silence. The guest house stood at the very end of the village. A two-story building covered with peeling boards, with a crooked porch where grass grew through the cracks. The house seemed to be watching her, not hostile, but wary like an elderly guard who hadn't waited for anyone in a long time. The owner of the house, a woman with short gray hair and cold amber eyes, greeted her silently. She simply opened the door, stepped aside, and nodded toward the stairs. "You'll be upstairs. The room by the window. With a view of the sea," she said finally, quietly, almost in a whisper. Nora went upstairs. The creaking of the steps echoed in her chest, as if the house sighed with each step she took. The room smelled of something old, a mixture of lavender, tobacco, and a hint of sea salt. The windowsill was scratched, as if someone had sat there for a long time, watching the waves in the evenings. On the wall hung a wooden wreath of dried herbs and a small silver bell. The window looked directly out onto the bay. The sea murmured softly, and in that murmur there was no anxiety, only infinity. Outside the window were streetlights, but none of them were lit. The neighboring houses seemed empty. Even the dogs weren't barking. Not a single voice. Already at night, lying under a heavy blanket, Nora couldn't sleep. Her head was empty, but in her chest, something trembled like a thin thread stretched to its limit. She turned on her side, glanced out the window, and shuddered. Someone had hung silver bells on the trees by the road. Hundreds of them. They swayed gently in the wind, ringing softly, as if the sound contained someone's cautious request. "Listen. Be still. Remember." Nora didn't know who had hung them, or why, but for some reason she didn't want to ask. Chapter 2. Woman on the Shore. Morning came to the village without the sun. The sea was leaden, and the sky seemed frozen, no clouds, no blue, no movement. Nora went outside, wrapped in a thick sweater, and step by step made her way down the path leading to the bay. She didn't know why she was going. She just had a feeling inside, as if someone had called her, not with a voice, not with a gesture, but with a piercing silence. The bells hanging from the branches were still ringing, barely audible, like the breath of someone afraid of being heard. The sound was unreal, not sharp, not clear, but muffled with a slight tremor, as if it were not metal tongues ringing, but someone's memories. The road to the sea was deserted. Tiny houses stood dead, shutters closed, no smoke from the chimneys, no people in the windows. Only the wind. It blew from the sea, carrying with it the smell of salt and something else, subtle, bitter, almost ashen. A smell that Nora did not recognize, but it reminded her of dreams after which you wake up with pain in your chest and cannot understand. Was it real, or were you just missing someone? The beach stretched along the shore, strewn with pebbles and washed-up seaweed. At the very edge, by the dark water, stood a woman. She was dressed all in black, a long coat, a wide-brimmed hat, white gloves. And she stood as if waiting for someone. Nora froze, not daring to come closer. The woman didn't move. Only the wind ruffled the hem of her coat, and at that moment it seemed to Nora that the bells behind her were ringing louder, as if more alarmingly. Suddenly, the woman turned slowly, as if each movement was part of a ritual. Her face was hidden by the shadow of her hat, but even from this distance, Nora sensed that she reminded her of someone. Not from the present. Not from her life, but from something long forgotten. The woman tilted her head slightly to the side, as if acknowledging her presence. And then she left. She didn't just walk away, she seemed to dissolve into the morning mist, step by step, until her silhouette disappeared among the gray waves and rocks. Nora moved closer to where she had been standing. The sand was dry, no footprints. But at her feet lay a single object. A small silver bell, almost the same as the ones on the trees. She picked it up. It was cold, slightly tarnished. And when she shook it in her palm, it made no sound. Chapter 3. The House That Never Sleeps. Nora returned home with the bell in her pocket. It didn't ring like the others, but it felt heavier, as if it held echoes of someone's breath. The threshold of the old house greeted her with a creak, and it was not just a sound, it was a reminder. You are back. You are here again. You are back in the past. She closed the door and leaned against it, as if behind it was not a deserted beach, but something else, something invisible. Nearby on the floor lay a rug with a worn floral pattern. As a child, she loved to step only on the petals, avoiding the stems. This strange game came back to her memory so vividly, as if she had played it yesterday. But yesterday was long gone. There was no smell in the kitchen. The house hadn't been cooked in for a long time. But when she approached the sink, it seemed to her that for a moment the air was filled with the smell of milk and fresh cinnamon. Like those mornings when her grandmother baked buns and Nora, still sleepy, sat on the windowsill and read books with faded illustrations. She opened a desk drawer at random and found old spoons, postcards, matchboxes from long-closed cafes, and small notes with recipes written in bold handwriting. On the back of one postcard, a seascape, someone had written in pencil, "I knew you would come back here when you forgot why you left." No signature. No date. Nora sat down on the floor. The house seemed to be watching her. It made no noise, no creaking, but she felt its presence, not as a structure but as something alive in which the walls breathe, the floorboards remember, and every corner carries something hidden. The house was not asleep. The house was waiting. She couldn't sleep that night. The wind outside the window shook the branches, and the bells rang, now louder, clearer. It was as if they were talking to each other, or warning her. She got up and went into the hallway. There, behind an old wardrobe, she found a door to the basement. As a child, her grandmother had forbidden her to go down there, saying that the stairs were old and the steps were rotten. But now she had the key in her fingers and a strange excitement in her heart. The door creaked. The air from the basement was damp, cold, and smelled of dust and metal. Old tools hung on the walls, and in the corner stood a chest bound in rusty iron. Nora bent down, touched the lid, and it gave way unexpectedly easily. Inside were books, bundles of letters, a handkerchief imbued with the scent of long-faded perfume, and a black and white photograph. It was of a woman wearing a hat. The same woman she had seen that morning on the beach. On the back was written, Mary, 1931. Don't forget. Nora clutched the photo, and at that moment the bell in her pocket rang, quietly, as if someone had sighed nearby. Chapter 4. The Shadow That Remains. The next morning, Nora woke up feeling cold. Not the kind of cold that comes through the windows, but a different kind, an internal cold. It was as if part of her had remained in the basement, among the letters, faded photographs, and silence that held other people's secrets. She lay under the blanket and listened. The bells were ringing outside the window again. Only now they weren't just ringing, they were calling. She left the house barefoot. The ground was damp, and the grass stuck to her heels. The bells hung in the same places, but the wind seemed to give them a different rhythm, not chaos, not randomness, but almost music. A melody she felt inside, but couldn't recognize. Nora followed the sound as if it were a thread. It led her along an old fence, past a pond with green duckweed, through a vegetable garden where nothing living had grown for a long time. There, in the far corner of the garden, she found a wooden plaque that had fallen to the ground. It was barely legible. Mary, 1907 to 1934. Her heart sank. She had seen that name before. In the basement, on the beach, and now on a gravestone. 34 years of life. Less than she herself was now. But why was that name everywhere? Returning to the house, Nora went back down to the basement. Among the bundles, she found a small album. Its pages were covered with neat handwriting, almost calligraphy with smooth curves of letters, as if written not with ink but with sounds. On each page was a note, a fragment of a thought, an echo of feelings. He came again. His boots left footprints in the garden, and I didn't have time to hide. But he didn't say anything. He just looked at me as if he was seeing me for the first time. Or the last. I heard a ringing. Not a bell. An inner ringing. As if someone had touched something inside me. I became afraid of sleep, because dreams are not just dreams. They call. Mother said bells protect. But I don't believe it. They ring when someone leaves. Or when they return too late. Nora turned the page and saw her surname. In different handwriting. And her grandmother's signature. Nora. She must know. One day. She stood in the middle of the basement, feeling the house around her shrink. It was so quiet inside that she could hear her own breathing. And something else. A rustle, as if fabric had slid across wood. She turned around, but there was no one there. That same evening, as the sun was setting, Nora went to the beach again. She carried Mary's photo with her. The waves washed ashore, and in their foamy edge, she thought she saw someone standing at the water's edge. A female figure in a light-colored shawl. Nora blinked, and there was no one there. But when she turned to leave, there were footprints in the sand in front of her, leading to the water. Only her feet weren't there.